Most doctors won't say this at your appointment, but your body has already been warning you for months. The problem is, you've been reading the wrong signals. That strange waking at 3 a.m., you think it's stress. The swollen feet by evening, you blame the shoes. The cold hands, the foggy mornings, the sudden tiredness after eating. You've been calling these things aging. But what if none of them are random? After 60, your body doesn't get louder. It gets more precise. It stops shouting and starts whispering in patterns. And those patterns, when you know how to read them, tell you exactly what's shifting inside, often months before anything becomes serious. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 10 body signals that most people over 50 completely overlook, not because they're invisible, but because no one ever explained what they actually mean. By the end, you'll know which ones to monitor, which ones to act on immediately, and one that shows up in the middle of the night that almost everyone gets wrong. Let's start with the one that's happening right now, probably without you even noticing. When your body stops feeling quietly reliable. You wake up in the morning, sit at the edge of the bed, and for a brief moment something feels slightly different. Not painful or alarming, just a quiet sense that your body is not responding with the same ease it used to. Most people move past that feeling quickly and tell themselves it is just part of getting older, something expected and not worth thinking too much about. But that small moment, the one that seems insignificant, is often where the real story begins. Because the body rarely changes in loud ways at first, it starts by adjusting quietly in the background. And those quiet changes are usually the ones that matter most when you catch them early. After the age of 60, the body does not suddenly fail or decline all at once. Instead, it becomes slightly less efficient across different systems, like circulation, oxygen delivery, and muscle recovery. This means you may still do everything you used to do, but it feels just a little heavier, a little slower, a little less automatic. It is not weakness, and it is not laziness. It is simply how physiology adapts over time. Think of it less like something breaking, and more like a system that needs more support to produce the same result. And that shift in efficiency is often the first layer behind many symptoms people later notice. The difficulty is that these early signals do not interrupt your life strongly enough to demand attention. They blend into your routine, they feel familiar, and they are easy to dismiss as normal aging. That is where many people make a quiet mistake without realizing it. Because the body often whispers long before it ever speaks clearly, and when those whispers are ignored for too long, the message tends to come back louder later. So instead of asking what is wrong, a better question is, what has changed compared to how you felt 6 months or a year ago? That comparison gives you a much clearer signal than focusing only on how you feel today. You can begin with simple observations like how your energy holds through the afternoon, or how your body responds when you stand up. Pay attention to patterns that repeat, not isolated moments that come and go. Because patterns are the language your body uses when it is trying to tell you something important. This is not about becoming anxious or hyper-aware of every sensation you feel. It is about building a calmer, more honest awareness of your own body over time. When you start recognizing small shifts without judgment, you gain more control over what happens next. And that awareness becomes powerful, because the next signs often seem unrelated at first. But once you see the pattern forming, everything begins to connect much more clearly. When tired no longer feels like a normal kind of tired. You sleep through the night, get up, wash your face, maybe even make your coffee the same way you always do, and yet your body already feels like it is working harder than it should. It is not the kind of tired that follows a busy day or poor sleep, because sometimes it shows up before the day has even really started. Many adults over 60 describe this as a strange heaviness, almost like the body is awake but not fully available. And because it is not dramatic, many people call it age, stress, or just a slower season of life. But persistent fatigue that does not match your rest is often one of the body's earliest quiet warnings. One reason this happens is that energy is not only about sleep. It also depends on how well oxygen, nutrients, blood flow, and recovery are working together behind the scenes. If any part of that system becomes less efficient, the body may still function, but it begins to spend more effort to produce the same result. That is why simple tasks can start to feel unusually costly, even when your schedule has not changed very much. It is a little like driving with the parking brake slightly engaged, because the car still moves, but everything takes more out of it. And after 60, that kind of hidden inefficiency becomes more common than most people realize. The important question is not whether you feel tired once in a while, because everyone does, but whether your fatigue feels different from the tiredness you used to know. Does it arrive earlier, last longer, or show up after activities that never used to drain you in this way? Do you feel less restored after sleep, or slower to recover after errands, chores, or even a short walk? A common mistake is assuming that if tiredness is common, it must be harmless. But when fatigue becomes a pattern instead of an occasional response, it may be pointing to something deeper that deserves attention. So start with a simple filter this week, and notice when your energy drops, what you were doing before it happened, and how long it takes for you to feel normal again. Pay attention to whether the fatigue is worst in the morning, after meals, in the late afternoon, or after light physical effort. That kind of pattern can be more useful than a vague statement like, "I have been feeling off lately." And do not only track how tired you feel, also notice whether you feel short of breath, mentally foggy, shaky, or unusually weak at the same time, because the combination around the fatigue often tells the clearer story. The good news is that this kind of signal is often easier to understand once you stop treating it like a personality problem or a motivation issue. This is not laziness, and it is not your body giving up. It may simply be your system asking for a closer look. Small patterns that repeat deserve more respect than big symptoms that happen once and disappear. And when tiredness starts becoming part of your normal day, it often opens the door to the next warning sign people tend to dismiss far too quickly. That next one often shows up in your hands and feet before it shows up anywhere else. When your hands and feet start feeling colder than they should, you are sitting in a warm room, the house feels comfortable, and yet your feet still feel cold against the floor, or your hands seem slower to warm up than everyone else's. Sometimes it shows up at night when you get into bed, and sometimes it appears in the morning when you first begin moving around the house. Because it is such a familiar sensation, many people treat it like a harmless personal quirk and stop thinking about it. But when cold hands or feet begin showing up more often, especially without a clear reason, the body may be revealing a circulation pattern that is becoming less efficient. And the reason this matters is that the extremities are often the first place where reduced flow quietly makes itself easier to notice. Your hands and feet sit at the far edges of the circulation system, so they are often the last places to receive strong, steady blood flow when the system is under strain. If blood vessels become less flexible, or if flow is not moving as smoothly as it once did, those outer areas can start feeling colder, slower, or slightly numb. That is why this symptom is not always about temperature alone, because sometimes it is really about delivery, meaning how well warmth, oxygen, and nutrients are reaching the tissue. A simple way to think about it is like water pressure at the end of a long pipe, because when pressure weakens, the farthest point feels it first. And after 60, that kind of quiet reduction can become more noticeable, even before a person feels anything stronger elsewhere. What makes this sign easy to miss is that it often arrives in small ways, such as mild tingling, pale fingertips, or a sense that your feet take longer to wake up when you start walking. Some people also notice that their toes look slightly different in color, or that their fingers feel stiff in ways they did not used to. The weak myth here is that if a symptom comes and goes, it must not mean much. But the signal behind the signal is repetition. Because when coldness keeps returning in the same pattern, the body is usually asking you to pay closer attention. And that is exactly why small, recurring signs deserve more respect than people often give them. So this week, notice when the coldness appears, whether it happens at rest or after sitting too long, and whether it improves quickly once you begin moving. Pay attention to tingling, numbness, color change, or a feeling that one side is noticeably different from the other. A practical test is to compare how your hands and feet feel in the same room at different times of day, rather than judging the symptom only once. If this is happening often, gentle walking, changing position more regularly, and avoiding long stretches of stillness can be a useful place to start. And if the coldness is persistent, worsening, or paired with pain or visible color changes, that is a smart moment to bring it up with a clinician. This may sound like a small thing, but small signs are often where body awareness becomes powerful, because they teach you how to notice patterns before they become harder to ignore. That is one reason conversations like this matter, since many people only start connecting these details after hearing them explained in plain language. The more clearly you read what your body is showing you, the easier it becomes to protect your energy, mobility, and independence with better timing. And once circulation starts leaving these little clues in the hands and feet, the next place it often reveals itself is during movement, when breathing suddenly feels different than it used to. That next shift can be subtle too, but it often changes how safe ordinary effort begins to feel. When breathing feels slightly harder during ordinary effort, you walk up a short set of stairs, carry a few grocery bags from the car, or move a little faster than usual, and suddenly you notice your breathing is heavier than it used to be. It is not always dramatic, and that is exactly why many people dismiss it, because they are still able to finish the task even if it feels less comfortable along the way. Sometimes the only sign is that you pause at the top of the stairs, or you slow down without really meaning to, just to let your breathing settle again. That quiet change matters, because when effort that once felt ordinary begins to ask more from your lungs and chest, the body may be revealing a deeper shift in how well it is keeping up. And in many older adults, that shift begins gradually enough that it gets mistaken for age long before it gets properly observed. Breathing during movement depends on coordination, not just on the lungs alone, because the heart, blood vessels, muscles, and oxygen delivery system all have to respond quickly when activity increases. If circulation is slower to adapt, or if the body is working harder to move oxygen where it needs to go, then even mild effort can start feeling more expensive than before. That is why the symptom is often not, "I cannot breathe," but rather, "Why did that take more out of me than it should have?" A useful way to picture it is like asking a small team to do a job faster without giving them more support. Because the work still gets done, but with more visible strain. And after 60, that extra strain can become one of the earliest clues that your body is compensating more than you realize. The key here is not whether you ever get winded, because anyone can after rushing or overdoing it, but whether your breathing feels unexpectedly heavy during tasks that used to feel manageable. Do you now avoid stairs more than before, walk more slowly without meaning to, or feel like you need recovery after very ordinary movement? One common mistake is assuming that if you can still complete the task, then the symptom must not mean much. But the signal behind the signal is change in tolerance, because a reduced comfort zone during effort can tell you a lot before more obvious symptoms ever appear. And that is why comparison to your own recent baseline matters much more than comparison to someone else. So start noticing what kinds of movement trigger heavier breathing, how quickly it settles, and whether it comes with chest tightness, unusual fatigue, dizziness, or a sense that your body is working too hard. A practical test is to pay attention during the same repeated task, like one flight of stairs, a short hill, or the walk from the parking lot to the store entrance. If the effort feels clearly different from what it felt like a few months ago, that is useful information and worth writing down, instead of just brushing off. For today, avoid pushing through the symptom aggressively, and for this week, choose steady movement, slower pacing, and honest observation rather than denial. And if shortness of breath is new, worsening, or paired with pressure in the chest, that deserves timely medical attention rather than guesswork. This is one of those signs that people often normalize for too long, because it arrives softly and still leaves them able to function. But functioning is not the same as thriving, and the body often shows loss of reserve before it shows true collapse. The earlier you notice that your breathing during effort has changed, the more wisely you can respond while there is still room to adjust calmly. And once the body starts revealing itself through breath, the next place it often shows the same story is lower down, especially by the end of the day, in the ankles and feet. That next sign can look harmless too, but it often says more about circulation than most people expect. When your ankles start swelling by the end of the day, you take off your shoes in the evening and notice the marks feel deeper than they used to, or your socks leave a line that lingers longer than expected. Maybe your ankles look slightly fuller, or your shoes feel tighter, even though nothing about your day seemed unusual. It often gets explained away as standing too long, or just normal fluid retention with age. But when swelling becomes a pattern, especially toward the end of the day, the body may be showing how well fluid is moving back through your system. And the ankles are often where that story becomes visible first. The circulation system does not only send blood forward, it also depends on an efficient return, especially from the lower parts of the body back toward the heart. Veins in the legs rely on small valves and muscle movement to push blood upward against gravity. When that return slows down, fluid can begin to settle in the lowest areas, which is why swelling often appears in the ankles and feet. A simple way to picture it is like water collecting at the bottom of a slope when flow is not strong enough to carry it back up. And after 60, that return system can gradually lose some of its efficiency without obvious warning at first. What makes this sign easy to overlook is that it often disappears overnight and then returns the next day, which makes people think it is temporary and harmless. But the real signal is not the swelling itself. It is the pattern of repetition and timing. Does it show up daily, even on lighter days, or seem to be getting slightly worse over time? A common assumption is that if swelling goes away after rest, it is not important. But recurring swelling, even if it resets each morning, can still reflect how your body is handling circulation and fluid balance. So begin by observing when the swelling appears, how far up the leg it goes, and how quickly it improves after elevating your feet or resting overnight. Press gently on the area and notice if the skin takes a moment to return to normal, which can give you a simple clue about fluid buildup. For this week, try alternating periods of sitting with short walks. Avoid staying in one position for too long, and elevate your legs for a few minutes during the day if needed. Use a simple Plan B, like flexing your ankles while seated or walking around the room every hour to support circulation. And if swelling becomes persistent, uneven between legs, or associated with discomfort or shortness of breath, it is worth discussing with a clinician. This is one of those signs that looks small, but reflects something systemic, not just local. The body rarely isolates a pattern like this without a broader reason behind it. And when you begin to notice how fluid moves, settles, and returns, you start understanding circulation in a much more practical way. Because the next signal often appears not in stillness, but in movement, especially when you change position too quickly. And that is where many people experience something brief but important that they often ignore. When standing up makes the room feel briefly unsteady. You get up from the bed, rise from the couch, or stand after sitting through a long meal, and for a second, the room feels slightly off, almost as if your body needs a moment to catch up. It may be a brief wave of lightheadedness, a dimming of vision, or just that strange feeling that you should hold still before taking the next step. Because it passes quickly, many people shrug it off and keep moving as if nothing important happened. But when that moment starts repeating, especially after ordinary position changes, it can be one of the clearest, quiet signs that circulation is not adjusting as smoothly as it should. And after 60, those few seconds can tell you more about the body's timing than most people realize. When you stand up, gravity suddenly pulls blood downward, and your body has to respond almost immediately by tightening vessels and helping blood reach the brain again. If that response is slower than it used to be, even by a small margin, you may feel a short dip before the system catches up. That is why the sensation often feels less like true vertigo and more like a brief lag between movement and stability. A simple way to picture it is like water pressure dropping for a moment when several taps turn on at once, because the system needs a second to rebalance. And with age, hydration, medications, circulation changes, and deconditioning can all make that adjustment a little slower. The detail that matters most is not whether it ever happens, because a rare, brief episode can occur for many reasons, but whether it happens often enough to become familiar. Do you pause before walking because you expect it now, or do you reach for furniture automatically without even thinking about it? A common mistake is to label it as nothing, simply because it is short. But the signal behind the signal is that your body may be losing some of its speed in managing blood pressure changes, and that can affect confidence, balance, and fall risk. So even a brief symptom deserves respect when it starts becoming part of your normal routine. A practical step for today is to slow the transition itself by sitting at the edge of the bed for a moment, planting your feet, and standing more deliberately instead of popping up quickly. For this week, notice whether it is worse in the morning, after meals, after warm showers, or on days when you have had less water than usual. Also pay attention to whether it comes with weakness, palpitations, or darkening vision, because those details make the pattern easier to understand. A simple plan B is to tighten your calf muscles or march gently in place before fully walking, especially if your body needs a second to stabilize. And if the episodes are frequent, worsening, or lead to near falls, that is a strong reason to bring it up with a clinician instead of normalizing it. What makes this topic so important is that it connects several earlier signs into one larger pattern, because energy, circulation, breathing, and fluid control do not really live in separate boxes. The body compensates quietly for a long time, and then it begins leaving clues during the most ordinary moments, like getting out of a chair or stepping away from the bed. That does not mean something terrible is happening, but it does mean your body may be asking for steadier support and more honest observation. And once you begin seeing those connections, the next sign becomes much easier to read because it shows up in the rhythm of the heart itself. Sometimes it lasts only seconds, but even then it can feel strangely hard to ignore. When your heartbeat suddenly feels different for a moment, you may be sitting quietly, folding laundry, watching television, or simply lying in bed, and out of nowhere your heart seems to beat harder, skip oddly, or flutter in a way that catches your attention. It can feel brief and strange, almost like one beat landed too strongly or arrived out of rhythm, and then, just as quickly, it passes. Because it ends so fast, many people try to forget it and move on, especially if it does not come with pain. But when your heartbeat starts feeling noticeably different, even for short moments, the body may be giving you another quiet clue about how its internal timing is changing. And this is one of those signs that feels deeply personal, because even a small change in rhythm can be hard to ignore once you notice it. The heart is not only a muscle, it is also an electrical system, which means its rhythm depends on signals firing in a coordinated way every second of the day. As we get older, that timing can become a little more sensitive to stress, dehydration, poor sleep, stimulants, medication changes, or shifts in circulation. That is why some palpitations are harmless and brief, while others deserve a closer look, depending on when they happen and what comes with them. A simple way to think about it is like a familiar song playing with one unexpected beat out of place. Because even if the music continues, your ear notices the difference immediately. And after 60, the body can become less forgiving of the small triggers that once passed without leaving much of a trace. What matters most is not just that the heartbeat feels different, but the context around it. Because that context often tells you whether it is likely to be mild or more worth investigating. Does it happen at rest, during movement, after caffeine, when you are overtired, or during moments when you also feel short of breath or lightheaded? A common mistake is to assume that anything brief cannot matter, or that anything noticeable must automatically be dangerous. But the signal behind the signal is pattern, because repeated fluttering, pounding, or irregular beats may reflect how your body is handling stress, fluid balance, blood flow, or electrical stability. And when a symptom repeats in the same kind of moment, it usually deserves more than a quick dismissal. So for now, do not panic when it happens, but do get curious in a calm and practical way by noticing when it appears, how long it lasts, and what you were doing right before it began. It helps to write down whether it felt like racing, pounding, skipping, or fluttering, because those small distinctions can make your observations much more useful later. For this week, reduce obvious triggers where you can, stay well hydrated, and pay attention to whether poor sleep or long periods without food seem to make it worse. A simple plan B is to sit down, breathe slowly, and let the moment pass without spiraling, while still taking note of what happened, instead of pretending it meant nothing. And if palpitations become frequent, prolonged, or come with chest discomfort, dizziness, faintness, or breathlessness, that is the right time to speak with a clinician. The reason this sign matters is that the heart often reveals stress through rhythm before it reveals it in louder ways. Your body is rarely trying to frighten you, but it may be asking you to slow down enough to recognize what has started to change. That kind of awareness becomes even more important because the next warning sign is one many people misunderstand completely, especially when it appears during movement rather than rest. And when that happens, people often wait too long because they expect heart-related symptoms to look far more dramatic than they usually do. In reality, one of the most important signs can feel much quieter, and that is exactly why it gets missed. Changes in bladder patterns. You may notice that your bladder no longer follows the same pattern it did a decade ago. You wake once or twice at night, feel urgency more suddenly, or finish and still feel like you did not empty completely. Some people laugh it off, others quietly plan their day around the nearest bathroom. It is common, but that does not make it meaningless. Because changes in bladder patterns often reflect deeper shifts that deserve a calm look. After 60, the muscles that support bladder control can weaken, and the signals between the bladder and brain can become less precise. In men, the prostate often becomes part of the picture by creating pressure around the urinary pathway. In women, hormonal shifts can affect tissue strength and pelvic support more than many realize. Kidney timing also changes with age, which is one reason nighttime urination becomes more common. And when several of these changes overlap, the pattern becomes easier to feel in daily life. A common mistake is assuming this is just part of aging, and therefore not worth observing. But frequency, urgency, weak flow, or incomplete emptying can each point to a different issue. Caffeine, alcohol, some medications, and late evening fluids can make the pattern worse without being the whole cause. The real signal is not simply going more often, but noticing what kind of change keeps repeating. And that is exactly why quiet body patterns are worth learning. Because once you notice them, you start making better decisions almost automatically. A useful step this week is to track timing rather than guessing from memory. Notice whether the issue is mostly daytime, nighttime, after coffee, or connected to specific habits. Simple pelvic floor work, better fluid timing, and reducing bladder irritants can help more than people expect. But if you notice pain, blood, sudden changes, or repeated nighttime disruption that is getting worse, bring that up with a clinician. Small observations now can prevent bigger frustration later. This is one of those topics people often avoid, even though it affects comfort, sleep, and confidence more than they admit. And if these explanations help you notice your own patterns a little more clearly, that is already a valuable step in the right direction. That is also why many people keep coming back to content like this, because calm guidance is easier to use than fear. You do not need dramatic symptoms to start paying attention, and the next signal often seems even less related at first, because it can begin with lightheadedness, balance changes, or a strange loss of steadiness. Lightheadedness or balance changes. You stand up from a chair, take a few steps, and for a brief moment something feels slightly off. Not enough to call it dizziness, not strong enough to stop you, but enough to make you slow down and steady yourself. Sometimes it happens when getting out of bed, sometimes when turning too quickly, and sometimes for no obvious reason at all. Many people dismiss it because it passes fast, but balance changes often begin quietly, long before they feel serious. After 60, balance depends on more systems working together than most people realize. Blood pressure has to adjust quickly. The inner ear has to stay reliable. Vision has to help orient the body, and muscles must respond without delay. If one part becomes slower, the whole system can feel less steady for a few seconds. That is why a simple change in position can suddenly feel different than it used to. And the body often reveals this through hesitation before it reveals it through an actual fall. A common mistake is blaming this only on age, when in many cases the issue is more specific and more manageable than that. Mild dehydration, low blood pressure on standing, certain medications, weaker leg muscles, or low B12 can all play a role. Poor sleep also makes balance worse, because the brain and body coordinate less efficiently when recovery is incomplete. The signal behind the signal is not one strange moment, but a repeated loss of steadiness in familiar situations. And that is where observation becomes more useful than assumption. A smart step this week is to notice exactly when it happens and what your body was doing just before it started. Standing up more slowly, hydrating consistently, and keeping legs strong with basic daily movement can improve this pattern. If you feel unsteady in the dark, use support points at home and do not rush nighttime trips to the bathroom. And if the sensation becomes stronger, more frequent, or comes with weakness, chest symptoms, or true spinning, that needs more direct attention. Small safety habits here are not overcautious, they are practical. Balance changes can feel easy to minimize until the day they interfere with confidence. But confidence in movement matters, because it affects how you walk, how active you stay, and how much you trust your own body. The good news is that this pattern often responds well when you catch it early and support the right systems. You do not need to wait for a fall to take steadiness seriously. And the next sign often shows up not in movement, but in a deeper tiredness that rest does not fully fix. Waking up tired even after sleeping. You wake up after what should have been a full night of sleep, but something feels incomplete. Your body is not exactly exhausted, but it is not restored either, as if the night did not fully do its job. You move through the morning a little slower, needing more time to feel ready than you used to. Coffee helps a bit, Movement helps a bit, but the baseline feels slightly lower than before. And when this becomes frequent, it is worth paying attention to the pattern behind it. After 60, sleep changes in structure, not just in duration. And that difference matters more than most people realize. The body tends to spend less time in deep, restorative stages, which are the ones responsible for repair and recovery. Hormonal shifts, lighter sleep cycles, and more frequent awakenings all reduce how efficient sleep becomes. Even if you are in bed for the same number of hours, the quality of that time may be different. And that is why rest no longer guarantees the same level of energy it once did. A common misunderstanding is thinking that more time in bed will solve the problem, when often the issue is not quantity, but depth. Interrupted sleep, even briefly, can prevent the body from completing its deeper recovery cycles. Breathing patterns during sleep, blood sugar fluctuations, and even late meals can all interfere quietly. This is why some people feel tired despite sleeping enough on paper. The signal behind the signal is not just fatigue, but fatigue that does not match your effort or routine. A useful approach this week is to focus on consistency rather than intensity when it comes to sleep. Going to bed and waking up at similar times helps regulate internal rhythms more than irregular long nights. Reducing stimulation before bed, keeping the room darker, and avoiding heavy meals late in the evening can improve sleep depth. Morning light exposure and light movement also help reset the sleep-wake cycle in a natural way. And observing how your energy responds over a few days gives you a clearer direction. This kind of fatigue can feel discouraging if you interpret it as loss instead of adjustment. But the body is not shutting down. It is simply operating under different conditions that require a slightly different strategy. When you align with that instead of resisting it, energy often becomes more stable again. You are not chasing the past. You are adapting to the present in a smarter way. And the next signal often appears in a place many people overlook, because it shows up in how your muscles respond to simple effort. Loss of strength in everyday tasks. You carry something simple, maybe groceries, maybe a laundry basket, and it feels slightly heavier than it should. Not impossible, not painful, just enough to make you pause or adjust your grip halfway through. You may even notice that tasks you used to do without thinking now require a bit more intention. And over time, you begin choosing easier options without fully realizing it. Because small changes in strength often arrive quietly before they become obvious. After 60, muscle mass naturally declines if it is not actively maintained, and that affects more than just strength. Muscles support balance, protect joints, and help regulate blood sugar and metabolism. When they weaken, everyday tasks begin to feel more demanding, even if nothing else has changed. The body becomes less efficient in how it distributes effort across movements. And that is why simple actions can start feeling slightly harder without a clear reason. A common mistake is assuming this is just unavoidable decline, when in reality, inactivity accelerates the process more than age itself. Even small reductions in daily movement can lead to noticeable losses over time. Protein intake, recovery, and consistent use of muscles all play a role in maintaining strength. This is why weakness often appears alongside fatigue, slower walking, or reduced confidence in movement. The signal behind the signal is not the task itself, but how your body responds to it compared to before. A practical step this week is to reintroduce light resistance in a way that feels safe and manageable. Simple movements like standing up from a chair repeatedly, carrying light weights, or using resistance bands can make a difference. You do not need intensity. You need consistency, because the body responds to regular signals more than occasional effort. Supporting this with adequate protein intake helps the body rebuild and maintain muscle more effectively. And paying attention to gradual improvement is more useful than expecting immediate change. Loss of strength is one of the most important signals to notice early, because it affects independence more than most other factors. But it is also one of the most responsive areas when addressed with the right approach. You are not locked into decline. You are responding to input, and that can be adjusted. The earlier you respond, the easier it is to maintain control over daily life. And the next signal often appears in a way people rarely connect at first, because it shows up in memory and mental clarity. Subtle memory and focus changes. You walk into a room and forget why you went there, or search for a word that feels just out of reach. It comes back later, sometimes minutes later, sometimes not at all, and you brush it off as distraction. Names take longer to surface. Conversations require a bit more focus, and multitasking feels less natural than it once did. It is not dramatic memory loss, just a subtle change in clarity that repeats often enough to notice. And that repetition is what makes this signal worth understanding instead of dismissing. After 60, the brain processes information a little differently, not weaker, but more selective and slightly slower in retrieval. Blood flow, sleep quality, and neurotransmitter balance all influence how quickly you access what you already know. If sleep is fragmented, or if circulation is not as efficient, mental clarity often reflects that almost immediately. The brain also becomes more sensitive to overload, meaning too many inputs can reduce focus and recall. And this creates a pattern where memory feels inconsistent rather than completely impaired. A common mistake is assuming that every small lapse is a sign of serious decline, which creates unnecessary worry. In most cases, these changes are functional, not pathological, and often linked to sleep, stress, or metabolic factors. Dehydration, low B12, poor sleep, and even blood sugar swings can all affect clarity more than people expect. The signal behind the signal is not forgetting once, but noticing how often clarity feels slightly reduced. And that is where awareness becomes more useful than fear. A practical step this week is to reduce cognitive overload rather than trying to push through it. Write things down more often, focus on one task at a time, and give your brain space to complete what it starts. Prioritize sleep quality, hydration, and regular movement, because these directly support brain function. If memory issues become progressive, interfere with daily life, or are noticed by others consistently, that deserves proper evaluation. And small adjustments early tend to protect clarity more than reacting late. Many people begin to pay closer attention to their health when mental clarity shifts, because it feels more personal than physical symptoms. And if you find yourself noticing these patterns more clearly now, that is not a bad sign. It is awareness improving. That kind of awareness tends to grow when you keep exposing yourself to clear, grounded information like this. You do not need to panic. You need to observe and respond with calm consistency. And the next signal brings all of this together, because it is not about one symptom, but about how multiple small patterns begin to connect. When signals start connecting. By this point, you may have noticed that these signals rarely arrive alone, even when they seem unrelated at first. Poor sleep, heavier legs, colder hands, lower energy, weaker muscles, and cloudy thinking often begin as separate complaints. But over time, they start forming a pattern, and that pattern usually tells the real story more clearly than any single symptom. This is where many older adults either dismiss too much or worry too much. And the wiser move is to start connecting the dots with calm attention. The body works as a system, not as isolated parts, which means circulation affects energy, sleep affects mood, and muscle health affects balance. When one area begins slipping, another often starts compensating, and that compensation can hide the issue for a while. That is why the first signal is often small, while the full pattern only becomes visible later. Biology is rarely random, especially after 60, when the body becomes more direct in how it shows strain. And once you understand that, These changes become easier to read without turning everything into a threat. A common mistake is focusing only on the loudest symptom and ignoring the rest, because the loudest symptom is not always the most important one. Swollen ankles may not start in the ankles. Nighttime waking may not start in the brain, and fatigue may not begin with sleep alone. What matters is the cluster, the repetition, and the timing of what keeps showing up together. The signal behind the signal is often connection, not intensity. And that is what helps you decide whether something is passing, manageable, or worth discussing more seriously. A practical step this week is to stop tracking symptoms in isolation and start tracking them in pairs or groups. Notice what tends to happen on the same day, what follows a poor night, what improves with movement, and what gets worse when routines slip. You do not need a complicated journal, just a simple record of patterns that keeps you honest about what is actually repeating. That kind of tracking often reveals more than memory alone, especially when symptoms are subtle. And it gives you something useful to bring into a medical conversation if the pattern keeps growing. This is where body awareness becomes a real advantage, because you are no longer reacting to single moments, you are reading the whole message. That does not make you anxious, it makes you more accurate, and accuracy protects independence better than denial ever does. The good news is that once patterns become visible, your next steps also become clearer and more practical. You begin doing less guessing and more responding. And the next topic is where that becomes especially useful, because not every signal should be treated with the same level of concern. Knowing what to monitor and what to act on. Some signals are quiet and manageable, while others are quiet only at the beginning and become more serious when they are repeatedly dismissed. That is why maturity in health is not about reacting to everything, but about knowing what deserves observation and what deserves action sooner. A little ankle swelling after a long day is one thing, but swelling in one leg with pain or redness is another. Waking at night now and then is common, but sudden chest pressure, shortness of breath, or fainting are not in the same category. And learning that difference can protect both your peace of mind and your safety. After 60, the body often gives smaller warnings before larger ones, but not every warning follows the same timeline or carries the same weight. Some patterns build slowly and respond well to better routines, while others signal that something more active may be developing underneath. The key is to watch for change in intensity, speed, and context, because those details often tell you more than the symptom name itself. A familiar pattern that stays mild is different from a new pattern that arrives abruptly or starts getting worse week by week. And that is why reading the body well means paying attention not only to what you feel, but to how that feeling behaves. A common mistake is waiting for a symptom to become dramatic before speaking up, as if only severe discomfort deserves attention. But early medical conversations are often most useful when a pattern is still small enough to describe clearly and address calmly. Sudden weakness, confusion, chest symptoms, black stools, blood in the urine, severe shortness of breath, or a fast-changing decline deserve prompt attention. So do symptoms that begin interfering with walking, sleeping, eating, or thinking in a noticeable way. This is educational, not medical advice. If symptoms are sudden, severe, or new, talk to a clinician. A simple rule for this week is to divide what you notice into 3 groups: monitor, support, and act. Monitor the mild patterns that are stable. Support the ones that improve with better habits, and act on the ones that are new, worsening, or clearly disruptive. That keeps you from minimizing what matters, but also keeps you from turning every small shift into a crisis. Good judgment in health usually comes from pattern recognition, not panic. And the more calmly you organize what you notice, the more useful your next decision becomes. This is where real confidence starts to replace uncertainty, because you are no longer treating every signal the same way. You are learning discernment, and discernment is one of the most valuable health skills anyone over 60 can develop. It helps you stay proactive without becoming fearful, and attentive without becoming overwhelmed. That balance is what protects independence over time. And the next topic is where we turn all of this into a simple plan, so you know what to do first instead of trying to fix everything at once. If this video helped you, the next one might reveal something important about your body. Take a moment to watch it now. You may notice something you've been ignoring.